Hello and welcome to the Soul Sync podcast. It's me, Jason Paul, and you're here on the part 2 of the Art of Mediumship Curriculum with medium Christine Morgan. Now, Christine's agreed to come on very kindly once every few weeks to record one of these episodes in her curriculum, and it's all about what Christine has learned over the years in unfolding and doing her development over the decades. She's going to come on to talk about different subjects she believes it takes for you to unfold your mediumship. So each episode is a deeper dive. Now, if you are a keen bean and want to jump straight into this episode on symbology, then absolutely do so. You don't need to listen to the first episode, but mediumship is a journey, and I would encourage you to go back a few episodes and to listen to the first part if you're just joining us now. So Christine's been a big influence on my mediumship, and she's one of the most beautiful souls I know, and the way that she works, the way she teaches really resonates with me. So whenever I get an opportunity to see Christine, because she's over in Australia, I always jump at it. Even when doing this recording, Christine was sitting there at night. I was sitting there first thing in the morning, primed with my coffee for this episode. So today we're discussing symbology as the language of the soul. Christine explains that symbols come through the own medium's internal order, whether that be imagination, feelings, belief, and understanding. And we talk about how I've kind of used symbology in my mediumship as one of the main aspects of how the spirit world work with me is through my clairvoyance. And a lot along the journey in my own mediumship, I've had times where I've not really understood how to interpret the symbols that I've been getting. I went through a whole stage, as I think we always do, where I couldn't work out whether it was me or the spirit world with my ever active over imagination. So we discuss that. We also discuss that the spirit uses what is already inside the medium. The spirit world doesn't simply drop a random symbol in. It works through the medium's own subconscious life experience and emotional associations. Now, I can relate to this because a lot of the time in recent times with my mediumship, the spirit world have used images of my own granddad. Like recently, I was giving a reading for a spirit communicator, and I kept seeing my granddad sitting on a bar stool swirling whiskey. Now, I knew that the symbology in that wasn't that it was my granddad, but I knew that there was something in the feeling of that particular scene. So we discussed the journey of the symbology and how over time you can really develop that to such a great level. And we also discussed as well that symbols aren't always literal. A coffin might mean someone's recent passing. A boat may not just mean a boat. A mosque may represent prayer, faith, solace, or a workshop. It's the feeling behind the symbol that matters much more than the obvious image. And that's what it's taken me quite some time to even work out with my own mediumship. I was taking the images too literal, and then I went through another stage where the images would just go up to my mind without even realizing I was doing it, and then I would try to place that piece of evidence. So Christine explains as well how we don't want to over-interpret too quickly. We also discuss what to do when a medium gets a no from a symbol or a piece of evidence, which is, something I think we all fear is no's, but I've learned to embrace the no now because you learn so much from them. So it's an action-packed conversation. This is the part 2 of the Art of Mediumship Curriculum with Christine Morgan. Christine Morgan, welcome back to your curriculum.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Nice to be back.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you back. And for people listening, this is the part 2 of the Art of Mediumship Curriculum that Christine's very kindly come on to do with us. And if you haven't listened to part 1, I would suggest going back to part 1 firstly, because this is a curriculum. It is about looking at each stage. But if you just want to listen, you're going to learn a lot from it anyway. So today, Christy, we're talking about symbology, language of the soul. What does that mean, firstly?
Well, I think that it's a very important aspect in the development of the mediumship that people start to understand their own mind. And once you understand your own mind, you then become comfortable with knowing how your own internal order works. And that internal order consists of imagery, symbols, and understandings that you have at the very core of you, which are actually indicated by your belief and understanding of things. And it's a very relevant part of your development, because the spirit world will use those aspects of you as well as you using them yourself intuitively. So the language of the soul is about the language of you, but also understanding how it infiltrates into the mediumistic state.
Because some people are going to be listening to this wondering, what do you mean by the symbology itself?
Okay. Well, the thing is that, a symbol is a symbol. A symbol's normally a couple of things. It's either a place, a situation, a name of something. A symbol can't be changed, but it's flexible. It can move, but you can't change it. And it's something that needs interpretation, because sometimes the spirit world need to pluck from your subconscious different aspects of imagery and symbols that represent things so they can help convey their information more clearly, because they're coming through your filters, which I'll talk about in a little while. They're coming through the filters of your mind. So the aspects of how you work with soul, if you want to talk about it in an old-fashioned way, it's almost like your own shorthand. That sort of thing. If you think of it that way, it's how you perceive things. So, for example, when I first started many, many years ago, every time I sat with somebody and there'd been a passing, I would see a coffin going over a wall. And I knew that someone had passed, and they'd passed, obviously, and gone. And eventually that all dissipated and disappeared, and I just knew that someone had died. But at the beginning, the coffin going over the wall represented a very recent passing for me. So the spirit world were able to use that in some way. And it's not like you went and looked for it and you decided on it. They're fundamental images and aspects from the core self of you that come into play through your development process. And they can be obscure, unusual. They can relate to your belief systems. And they can be very simplistic.
It's the fact that you said that the symbols were coming to you kind of initially with the coffin, but that then sort of stopped happening and it was just coming through as a knowing. Was that because you believe that, your spirit team then thought, well, okay, she's understanding that now. That was what we used at the beginning, but now we don't need to use that because you've got to a point of your development, so to speak?
Well, I don't really think the spirit team were very much involved with that. I have a really different view about the spirit team. So I think that my development and evolution in my own mediumship was growing. And as I developed and understand the principles of the craft more, then my mind could understand more. There may well be other people in the other world, but it's not like I needed a spirit team to help me understand it. Because when you're making a communication, it's a mind-to-mind communication, whether it's incarnate, somebody here, psychic reading, or discarnate, someone with the other world. Really, your spirit team don't always get involved with that. They're usually behind you or somewhere around, not necessarily that you need them to make that communication. You're capable of doing it with your own ability.
I think one thing that I've noticed since I've been unfolding my mediumship is I always get symbology. Like, it's always for me either a knowing, a feeling, or symbology. And symbology is one of the main things that I feel that the spirit world show me. But it's taken me a long time, firstly, to understand when I get the symbol, the $1 million question, is it me or spirit, for a very long time. And I guess just to touch on that point, a lot of what I get is symbology, and it's always about trying to understand how to, when I get that sign, how to use it. So I guess the first question is, people are going to be thinking is, if I'm getting some kind of symbol or something, how do I know that this is my, something that's coming from another entity, not, that's of my imagination?
Well, in realistic terms, it is actually coming from you, but the spirit world are using your understanding of that imagery to convey their information. So basically, the symbols come from you. You see, everything has to pass through the medium's mind, and the medium's mind will decipher according to their own emotional mental makeup. The medium's mind will filter in symbols and images according to their core beliefs. So what really you have to do as a medium when you're developing is saying, what is your language of your soul? What is your language of spirit information? Do you know your expression of interpretation information with language of the spirit? So the fact is, it's really coming from you, from your core beliefs, through your mental filters, and the spirit world will use that to convey information. They don't come round and say, oh, I'm going to drop a triangle in Jason's mind. They actually will say, oh, there's a feeling that when we talk about triangle, Jason will relate that to school percussion or school orchestra, and they may use that if they need to convey that piece of information. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I feel that and we were talking about this just before we pushed the start button. So one of the biggest challenges I've had in recent times that I feel I've just turned a corner on has been getting a piece of evidence. For instance, what would tend to happen is the spirit world, let's say, would give me a bar stool, and then I would take that, it would go up to my mind without realizing it, and then I would try and place it. So what I might come out with is, oh, I'm seeing, you on a kitchen stool, or I'm seeing you in a bar. So I'm interpreting that. And what I had to have was a reset with my spirit team to say, look, I realise that I'm making this very difficult for you. You must be slamming their head on concrete at times. They give me a bar stool and I come out with something totally different. But the interesting thing that I've noticed about the symbology is how intelligent the spirit world are. So for instance, yesterday I did a reading because Christine, I was full of enthusiasm after my platform appearance the other day. I went onto a website, very soul, and thought, right, I'm going to do a reading because I want to experiment with this. So I went onto the reading. I didn't do my usual sit in the power for 20 minutes before, because all that does is put me in my head. 2 minutes before, came onto the reading, and I've realised, because I'm just starting to realise how I work best, went on, did it, and I got a Weatherspoons, but not any Weatherspoons. I got a Weatherspoons from back when I was 18. And, why did they not show me a Weatherspoons that I've known in more recent times? Because of the fact that there was even something in the fact that they were showing me it at that time in my life as a symbol to, what was going on in the sitter's life at that time. And it just blows my mind.
That's right, because you see, the intelligence in the spirit will use symbols most meaningful to the medium, and therefore it's more effective in what they want to convey. But it is about the medium understanding that, your mind will decipher images and symbols according to your own emotional and mental makeup and belief systems.
Because they can only use what we have in our mind. I'm trying to think of an example when I've been given something. And so, for instance, sometimes I will get a character come through where the character in itself is unique, the personality, but the symbology is always drawing on past memories of mine. So, for instance, I had a reading the other day where it was my granddad swirling a whiskey glass in quite dim light. And I thought, well, what am I trying to be shown there? And why is my granddad doing this? And it was all about my granddad being a reflective person, the fact that he wasn't a big drinker, the fact that he would swirl the whiskey round when he was thinking. And I just think to myself, how are they doing that? If every single thing that we have in our life can be drawn upon, how are they doing that? And how the hell can they, in that speed, you say, spirit person, please come here. They're always there. Not only are they there, but they seem to be fully briefed on everything that we've done, which makes me feel that this has been, when we think we're just programming in this, I almost feel like it must be like a telephone exchange where they've picked us out for, months before.
Well, the thing is, what you have to remember is, the core energy of your readings, beyond all your perceptions, beliefs, opinions, personality, etc., is the truth of the spirit communicating, wants to get the truth over. And the truth can only be according to how well you can express that. And so they will pluck anything from your subconscious mind to actually help convey that. And so it helps to understand that, the brain and the nervous system, everything's recognized in the waking state in the conscious mind, and your mental receptivity is dependent upon an individual's education and physical environment. So it's it's how well you will feel it, understand it, and sense it. But this is part of your mediumship development that you have to work with, you have to practice with, and you come to understand, basically, if you want to say, your own code in a very natural way, because there's no technique, there's no exercise, there's no thinking I have to be clairvoyant, I have to be clairaudient, none of that. It's about being naturally acceptable to what's working through your receptivity.
It is about just going into these things as well. And it's very hard at the beginning, because when I am getting those very strong kind of clairvoyant images, it's understanding how to interpret that. And I think most importantly, not interfere with it. How did you... And what did that look like for you over time? Because one of the hardest things I can't help to do is but be nosy. Spirit world gives me something, and the first thing I want to do, and and I do feel I'm turning this corner, you'll be glad to know, Christy, especially when you're part of my education in a roundabout way. You'd be disappointed if I was still stuck on this point, but I'm turning a corner. But what's that look like to you over time? And how would you advise people when they start to get these signs, how to interpret them?
I think that what we do is, one, you have to understand, symbols are a profound expression of human nature. They've been in all cultures at all times, and they address our intellect, our emotions, our spirit. And an aspect of symbolism that's important, but less explicit, is the side that relates to our inner psychological and spiritual world. And I think when you're developing, you understand that inner world, or you think, or you should think a little bit about that inner world, because you're affecting your work. And a symbol can represent some deep intuitive wisdom, and they can actually have specific connotations. And, in addition to the very obvious meanings, sometimes they're vague, they're hidden, they're unknown. So it's about us applying our feeling of understanding to it. And so for myself, I really had to learn the hard way and learn that not every symbol was exactly as it was, that I had to follow the feeling I had with it. I didn't look to the imagery of clairvoyance, the words of clairaudience, or anything like that. Forget the clairs. They all work naturally anyway if you're developing. It is about how it makes you feel, what you're getting from that in relation to the content that you're dealing with the recipient. So, if you've got somebody who's got very strong religious beliefs in the spirit world, and they're coming through and they're showing that, there's a way of expressing it. But if your beliefs are very much against that, or don't quite understand it, you can very well mix that symbol up, and you can make something into nothing. Does that make sense?
It does. And you say something interesting there, that it's what you feel, which is, I guess, where I've been stuck for a while, because the first thing that happens without me even realizing it is I'm thinking about the symbol. So, I guess if you're listening to this and when you get a symbol, it goes straight up into your head, then that's, not where you need to be.
Yeah, I think if you think about it, that, certain kinds of symbolism constitute a universal language, because the images and their meanings occur in similar forms and they carry similar power. So right across cultures and centuries, that's been going on since the year dot. Symbols that go to make up this language are the natural expression of the inner psychological forces that are within us. And I think once we come to terms and understand that and stop thinking that it's out of us, we then start to relate to how it can make us feel, how we can express it. And in doing so, you then can portray the information a little bit better, because symbols play a part in our own inner lives. They resonate with our emotions. They can be drawn from the deep collective unconscious. And sometimes the seat of these instinctive patterns of thought and behavior, for millennia, human experience has had them, and it's shaped today how we recognize emotions and values. So a lot of universal symbols are drawn from psychology, Eastern and Western spirituality, and history. And there's some archetypal influences on human thought and behavior, where symbols gained knowledge from clinical studies, surveys of myth and tradition. Carl Jung, for example. So when you look at things, there's universal symbols, there's symbols that are within you from your own core belief, and they are things that you will learn that through the mediumship, your mind can create patterns, and you learn to work and resonate with that, but not get stuck in a pattern, because then you become inflexible in your development.
I suppose when the spirit worlds are coming through and they're using us as the telephone, so to speak, I guess the language that they speak in and how they're making a communication, because, you know, I wish it was just a telephone line and I could just pick it up and have a chat with my granddad. How are you, my darling? How's it going? But that's not how it works. What they're having to do is draw on, I guess, our experiences, what we've been through, but not just that, how we felt at that time, the emotion attached to that particular time in our life. But then they're using the collective consciousness, which begs the question that, you know, when a spirit person comes through, it must take them some level of lots of practice to even understand how to navigate this.
Well,
it's like Morse code times a million in terms of complexity, isn't it?
It is. And we haven't popped our clogs for a weekend and gone up there and found out. I think that's something we'll understand when we get to the other side. We can't comprehend it because of that higher supreme intelligence. All we know is that it's in an operational function of the human psyche. And it has been for years, you know, the ability to devise, manipulate, comprehend symbols, even at an abstract level, is one of the main characteristics that distinguish how we are today from primitive relatives. If you think about, you know, the old Stone Age, 30,000 years ago, archaeological evidence suggests they didn't live in caves. They were places of initiation that represented the womb of the earth, and they drew things like that, or they drew things that what they believe were the home of the spirits. So all those things were according to the primitive imagination at that time. Whereas we've advanced psychologically and we've moved with mediumship psychologically, we understand now that we can be flexible with symbols and we can work with them, but they come from the inner core belief of who we are. And that's, you know, really important. I mean, if you think about all the old paintings, the ones that were found in some of the deep labyrinth caves in France and Spain, Europe, your side of the world, all those sort of things that go back eons of years, they were working in symbolic form long before we try to do it with mediumship. Animals, abstract, geometrical shapes, quadrangles, spirals, groups of dots and lines, they all represented something. They all had a magical function and fundamental patterns in the human psyche. The human psyche has just evolved a little bit more. So therefore, the spirit world has evolved more as well. And so with that, they come to understand the meaning that we feel behind a symbol, and therefore can draw it from the subconscious or deep collective unconscious to help us portray it. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And what's going through my mind as you're saying that is it's not just about the symbol itself, but it's about our relationship, how we feel towards that symbol, because that, I guess, is just as important as the symbol itself in a lot of ways.
Totally. And so, you know, it'll often relate to a situation, be a name of something, a place or something. You can have the most abstract, unusual things that can take you to the most profound information from the other world. And we have people who actually do intuitive art where they draw symbols and are able to interpret the symbols to give a reading to someone. We have the spirit world who we know can pluck those things from our subconscious to help formulate information. So I think it's a very important aspect that people look deeper and beyond into the symbology of the language of the soul, rather than just take everything at top value. Because as the medium grows and evolves, so will their understanding of how they operate.
So when For instance, I'm doing my mediumship. People who are listening to this are doing their mediumship. I get a symbol, and I'm learning to become much more comfortable with the word no. I'm almost, I wouldn't say I'm embracing it, but I'm certainly moving more in that direction. But then someone can't take a symbol. Where do you go? Because when I see you work, it's so fluid, and I can only imagine how much is going on behind the scenes there. But, and I've seen instances where you'll get something, I believe, that's symbolic. Someone might not take it, but then you don't leave that alone, Christine. You're back with that, trying to work out where that fits. So how do you go on that journey because a lot of people will get the symbol, won't take it, and then move on and discount it. But that's important, that piece of evidence in some way. That's a part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, that is part of the story. So if I'm in the fluidity of communication with the other world naturally, and I know that it feels right for me, and the person says, no, I don't understand it the way I've interpreted it, I will usually leave it, go on to another piece of information, and let the spirit world bring it back round to me so I can interpret it in a different manner. But if I'm a little bit which I'm a bit naughty, I'm like a dog with a bone, because if I feel it really strongly, and I'll give you an example of that, which just happened recently. What can take place is the fact that when I have that feeling so distinctly and the person's still saying no, I then understand that I'm not interpreting it correctly, or I'm not perceiving it in the way that it could be perceived. So I either have to work around it, go back to it, or ask the spirit world to bring me something and bring it back to me in a different way. And you don't always have time for that because you're so in the flow of the power. You're not thinking or cognitizing what's going in your head. You're in that natural fluidity of communication. So you're not going back and saying, oh, and what's this and what's that and what's this and what's that? Because you haven't got time for that. You're in that flow of conversation with the other world. And if I say, okay, no, that's not correct, I will carry on with my work and hopefully they will bring it back to me in a different way I can present it.
So in that instance, when you was in that reading, this is one of the hardest things about mediumship is it's so individual. It's so, one person feels another. We all have our own individual ways, which is why I feel that, good teachers in mediumship are hard to find because, it's trying to help someone unfold it is difficult. But what is going on internally for you at that moment? What are you feeling when this is all happening? Because, when I see you work, there's so much going on, and me and you are very similar in the fact that we're quick workers. The way that you work, there's a beauty to it because it's quick and there's a certain pace to it. So, when you're getting these things going on, even a symbol coming in that isn't taken, there's so much going on in that moment. How are you navigating that? What are you feeling in that moment?
Well, to be very truthful, is sometimes all I know is that I'm in the process of that communication. As I say, I'm in the river with the spirit. I'm in the river of flowing. I'm flowing with the other world in the river of the spirit, delivering what they want. Obviously, you have to pause and you have to pace yourself. But if you stop and think too much, you allow the brain to engage and start unraveling you. So yes, I do work very quickly, and often I will just let the power flow with me and go back to it, like I said. In that feeling of something, if I really feel strongly about it, I will know that I'm not interpreting it correct. And I may well say that to my recipient. Just one moment, you've said no to me, but I know there is something significant about this. Let me come back to you. And I will carry on with the contact and see if I can then present it in a different way. And so normally when I get that strong feeling that I know it's right, it will come back. It's not something you can teach. Sorry, Jason, it's not something you can teach. It's something that comes through experience. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think there's such an important point in that because this is the whole thing with mediumship. You never stop developing and the development goes on forever. And it's not something that you're going to go on, a course and then suddenly be able to do it. Funnily enough, it makes me laugh. the best ever reading I ever did was the very first time I went to the college, and it was I say it was the best reading I've ever done. I've done better since, Christy. But the moral of the story is, I went on the platform. I didn't know where I really was in the college. I didn't have any expectation. I was sort of used in my day job to standing up talking. Went up there without a care in the world, brought through someone, and I was reflecting on that the other day, because it was in that moment I didn't really care how I did, because I had no expectation, no pressure on myself. And there was a lot to be said for why that reading was so good. I think there was an element of the spirit world giving me a big carrot, but I also feel that it's taken me probably 5 years to now get to that point of not being as bothered by, what's going to happen and what's going to unfold. As you were talking there as well about the kind of what you're doing there in that moment, when I did my platform, my first bit of platform on Sunday, and I think this feeds nicely into it, I was given a very distinct piece of evidence. And the evidence was that I had a lady who would have used her handbag as a weapon once, but this was a very... It was. She used her handbag as a weapon, but she told me that this was the source of a lot of jokes later on, and people would make fun of how she'd beaten someone with her handbag. Now, the problem I had at this point, I had three hands up, and I just couldn't get it down. And I'd given the handbag evidence, and I still had 3 people with their hands up. In that moment, I was losing the communicator, because I was getting lost in the people in front of me now. How do you, because in that situation where you're getting a symbol, you're giving it to someone, there's a no coming up, the medium can then drop the power, lose it. How do you reactivate and try and step back into that communication to get it back going again when, you get into these situations?
Yeah. You go back to your last piece of positive information. Say, okay, you've just heard what I've said about the handbag. Let me come back to what I've just told you about this wonderful lady. Bang, bang, bang. And you go back to your last positive statement that you made about that lady, and you don't lose your power. That's all in your mental mind. Pull yourself into that contact. So you really try to become as close to them as you can and deliver what they want to impart. Go back to your last piece of positive information. Don't worry about the nose and the handbag. Let it come back to you in a different way. And usually sometimes maybe at the end of the reading go, oh, you've all said yes to this handbag, but I know only one of you know that it had red handles or it had a black purse inside. And someone goes, yes, that's me. Thank you. You're the recipient. So the spirit world will find a way to nut that down if they really need, and they do really need, to get to their recipient as best they can. But you always go back to your last positive statement, and don't let the brain come in and start organizing and presenting what it thinks is right. Be with the communicator.
It's interesting because when you go back to that good evidence, it sort of re-energizes it, doesn't it? And there's something in that gets the power back going again. And I've noticed that. And I do that a lot, actually. If I notice the energy is dropping, I'll go back to say, right, so I've got this man, this is what it is, and, this is who they are, etc., etc., and that sort of re-triggers it. When you talk about symbology, and someone mentioned something to me recently, and I saw someone work, and it really grabbed my attention because I saw this medium called Nicola work, and she would do a reading, but she would take every single thing available to her. And I noticed that as she was reading, she would be getting symbols, these would be coming through. But if her eyes were drawn over to, say, I don't know, a certain bookshelf, she would feel, okay, I'm being drawn to that. What is it within that bookshelf? So with the symbology, would that also extend to not just what you're getting in your own, through your clairs, but also through, how you're being directed to things in that room? Because symbology can be anywhere, can't it? It can be in front of us. It can.
Yeah, of course, because in that way, the spirit world will then inspire the mind to talk about something relevant. So perhaps you might start a communication, but then be very drawn to the bookcase. And there might be a specific book, a color, a binding, or a title that you are drawn to speak about. There'll be a reason behind that. The spirit world will use everything in your environment to to help you convey information. And this is what I say to people when we're developing. You should, not that you have to go around being very, very detailed, but be aware of the environment you're in. Look at the shape, the textures, the colors, the form of things around you. I'm in my beautiful little office now that I love. This is my little spirit cabin at home. This is where I sit. It's my little spirit room. And so I sit facing a little garden window. I see things in the trees by the shapes of the leaves of the plants and the trees. So the spirit world know that I take my focus there, which is beyond my client's shoulders. And I'm able to take detail from that garden structure to lead me to aspects of information sometimes.
There's going to be people listening to this going, okay, right, you're looking out your lovely window in your spiritual HQ. I can only imagine the vibration there. My goodness, I'd love to be in your spiritual HQ. But that to one side, there's going to be people thinking, well, okay, you're looking at the tree and all of a sudden Christine looks at a certain leaf and all of a sudden you then connect that to a leaf that looks a bit small, a baby leaf. It's signifying something to you. How the hell are you making that connection? What is going on in that moment? Because I was inspired when I saw that Nicola work. I thought, my goodness, she's using every available thing to her. And I thought, I'm limiting the mediumship.
Yes, of course. Well, it's because what's going on is the spirit are directing my attention to a certain area to actually formulate information into my mind. Right? Remember, the spirit world don't have a tongue. They're not standing next to you, chatting 10 to the dozen. They have to work really through the bilge and mucky minds that we have with every aspect that we have around us to portray the information. So I say to people, look at the environment. Let's look at the plants that I can see in your room now. Look at the books. Look at the color of the wall. Look at the shape of the chair. Take detail in, but when you're sitting and if the information is not flowing as fluidly as you like, allow yourself to be drawn to areas which may tell a story for you, which may be part of your communication.
I think one of the biggest pieces of advice, I would give people, and it's so much easier said than done, is to try and clear your mind before you go into a reading. But when you're getting a symbol, not to let it go up to the brain. But then do you know what? I speak to so many people about this, and I've gone through so many different schools of thoughts that, I say, right, I want to be out of the brain, but then it's the imagination and the mind. And especially with people who've got ADHD, a quick mind, that's a good thing. So the mind isn't the enemy here, but you're trying to, and you said it earlier, it's about when you get that symbology, sticking with the feeling. So people are listening to this, they are getting symbols. How would you suggest that people start to go on a journey? Because, for instance, one thing that I feel has helped me is journaling. When I get a symbol, journal it. What did I feel? And starting to, make that conscious effort with the spirit world to make them aware that I'm acknowledging this symbol. This is how I feel about it. This is the foundation that I'm laying on how I interpret it, etc., etc.
Of course. Again, that comes back to you, like I said before, your personal shorthand, your code, so to speak. But always remember, it will always be in context to the person you are reading. So you might get a boat with someone, and it might just be a plain boat for some person. It might mean something else. You might be drawn to the wood panels on the boat. Does that mean that you are dealing with a carpenter who actually built a boat rather than someone who just owned a boat? So it's about going in and having the feeling around that symbol. And as you do it, it happens very naturally because you're not looking. If you try to formulate it into a box that A means B, B means C, C means D, you will restrict your development. So it has to be in context of every individual that you read. So, for example, we might talk about the shape of plants with one person, but the shape of plants I want to talk about with another might mean something very different. It's always in the context to the individual and how it's making you feel at that time and what your understanding is. But they are going to be symbols that when you see them, they mean something to you in your mediumship. And they're a very natural process. They're not made up or grabbed from a book. They're things that come from your higher inner self, the core you, like I said earlier. And so that then becomes an aspect.
One word that just jumped out at me, it pricked my ears up as you were talking there, was the word try. I'd probably go as far as saying, if you are trying at all, you're in your mind, you're in your brain.
That's right. Absolutely.
You know, you shouldn't be trying has actually been one of the biggest, I think, blockers of my mediumship. Then I couldn't get my head around it. Well, I'm trying, Christine. I'm, you know, in every other aspect, I'm trying. Why is it not working? Oh, because you're trying, Jason. You know, it's like, well, hang on a minute. How does that work?
Well, I think that obviously, you know, we've talked previous episodes about the natural surrender, but I think you have to recognize that the sensory side of the brain, its sensory details of the present, it categorizes, it organizes, it records, and it stores specifics of the here and now. It's reality based. And then you have to recognize the intuitive side of the brain seeks to understand, to interpret and form overall patterns of all information collected. So it speculates on possibilities, including, you know, its imagination, conceptual, abstract, creative, and feeling based. So recognizing the sensory side and the intuitive side, very, very important. Very important. It's not an easy science, but I think that a lot of people let beautiful gems of information go because they don't understand symbology or they don't work enough with it. And you can work with symbology on a psychic, intuitive level, and indeed in a spirit communication. It's about exploration and practice.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I do find in my readings at the moment now, I do find that I keep blending the psychic and the mediumship quite a lot at the moment, and I can't help but, and I don't know if this is what your views are on this, but when I'm in a reading with someone, when I'm taking in the environment, I'm finding that the psychic almost kind of is fueling the mediumship in a lot of ways, and I find now that there's quite this natural flow. What's your views on that? Because a lot of people, you know, feel, well, can I use both? I think just use anything that's available to you.
Well, I agree. And I think that you have to understand your psychic mind because you are an intuitive. You have to understand the natural intuitive side of you. And you have to remember that it's a living, natural thing. It's a natural living phenomena that is in our divine right. So everybody has this. And then I think that if you apply it and work with it, it stimulates the mediumship. So it's very common that sometimes we can mix up both together. We try not to do that, and that's what the goal is of the medium. Try not to mix both together, to understand the difference between the true psychic and the medium, remembering that all mediums are psychic, not all psychics are mediums. And because of the lack of understanding, I do believe there's a lot of people working as mediums today who are actually just great psychics. You know, they're great psychics. They're not actually touching the other world because they're reading a lot of things from their recipient. And so we have to understand the importance of the development process with the power, linking into that natural world and taking time and commitment with it. Now, I believe the spirit world is for everyone, but I certainly don't believe everybody can be a medium. But I believe everybody can learn to develop their intuition. So the symbology aspect comes into the intuitive state and the mediumistic state, but it's about how well you understand the process.
Can you give us some examples then of, you've obviously mentioned about how the coffin at the beginning there, but other examples of how, you know, the spirit world will give you a symbol and how you've learnt then that this is a symbol for, because sometimes, you know, in the symbol itself, like you've kind of said, it isn't always as literal as, you know, you're seeing a kettle, it's a kettle. It could be a symbol of something. So, you know, I think it's just good for people to understand that it isn't always so literal, and how you've sort of learnt to unpack the feeling and how to interpret the symbols themselves.
Okay, well, you learn because people say no to you. For a start.
Yeah. Well, don't be afraid of the nose.
That's right. Don't be afraid of the nose. You're incorrect. And so you then have to really go away and think about that and contemplate on that. Well, this is what it meant to me, but I did that wrong. How else could that be presented? What feeling is it with me? So for myself, I actually can't tell you in a regimented form of how it will be or how it will work, because I won't know until I'm in the communication. I have no idea how the spirit world are going to work with me at any time, or indeed who's even going to communicate. So they will just use everything accessible to me. I did start at some stage, many years ago, I would see different symbols of different crosses. You know, like I would see the Star of David, I would see the Celtic cross, I would see the Christian cross, that sort of thing. All of those things signified to me different belief systems in different religions. So I understood from my own knowledge and understanding, that's what I was portraying to the independent person. Sometimes around the time of Hanukkah and things like that, I might see the Jewish candles and all of that sort of thing. So it might be something very significant according to the faith. Sometimes I will see a mosque. And a mosque might represent to me not necessarily that someone went to a mosque, but that it's a place of prayer, that someone who I'm communicating with went to a place of solace, contemplation, a place of worship, a place of prayer, or they had it within themselves. And again, in context to the individual that I'm working with. So to nail it and put it all down into a box is too difficult, because I believe personally that the world is full of magical, wondrous things that the spirit world can use to impart information. I think there is nothing off limits. And I think that just when you think that you're just getting the hang of something, something will happen to get you to think about it or understand it at a deeper level. So I would say, you know, I don't think you should buy books on symbology personally. I think read them if you're interested, because they're quite fascinating. You know, we know about lots of different traditions. You can talk about the gods, the goddesses, the symbolism of the elements of the ancient world, the gods of ancient Egypt, the new Stone Age in the last 10,000 years. We can talk about totem poles, anything like that. All significant. They're all significant. But I think if you tie yourself down into thinking this is black and white, you miss all the beautiful colors in between of what the spirit world can bring you.
Even a book on it, you know, yes, I encourage people to read. I can't say I'm a great reader myself with my attention span, but you can end up surrendering your power. You read the book, you then assume the person is an expert in that. Then you feel that you need to understand all of the book to understand symbology, and all the while longer, you're just going more and more in your head. So I think there is something definitely to be said about that, actually.
I think it's important. Look, I've got lots of books on symbology. And when I say don't read them, I don't mean don't read the book literally. I mean, obviously, research, have a look, but keep an open mind and review things. What we have to remember is that, you know, symbols have been going on for years. They've been subject to analysis by historians, archaeologists, psychologists, and to date, there's no unified theory has emerged to account for the language of symbolism, in the same way that grammatical theory explains the fundamental framework of spoken or written language. So symbols, unlike our written words, are not limited by practical concerns. They're variety, they're abundant, and they're only constrained by the limits of the human imagination. And I think that's really important, because they appear in every conceivable form: pictures, metaphors, sounds, gestures, colours, myths, personifications. The subconscious draws on all sources for their inspiration. And we know through cultures and religions, they've been used for eons of years. And so there is actual truth in all of it. The fact is, the truth is so vast, we can't possibly comprehend and understand the whole world of symbolism itself.
It was making me think, as you were saying that, I guess certain symbols are kind of internationally recognised. You get the shape of a heart. Everybody knows what a heart is. But then there's certain symbols which, in different cultures, different people, even people in the same street could have a different interpretation. There's certain symbols, I guess, where you see a sad emoji. I know you're sad, Christine. I'm wanting to give you a hug. There's...
Yeah.
But, you were saying as well about, and one thing that makes me laugh is I can imagine your spirit team have got quite a sense of humour when it comes to symbols. I've noticed mine have. They seem to draw on my sense of humour when it comes to symbols to grab my attention.
Of course they will. They will use anything that they can in any way to get things to you. And sometimes the mind is so mucky, they've got to work through it to portray the most simplest thing. And I think that what we have to recognize is that we live in a world of archetypes. We live in a world of symbolism. We live in a inspirational world, and it's our approach to this thing of symbolism that actually brings gold to the mediumship, because you're not constraining yourself. You're not thinking, I have to go A, B, C, D. You can be open, and it's an abundant feeling when you have a good knowledge of symbolism and you practice with it and you work with it. If you think of tarot cards, if you think of the rune stones, anything like that, all that wonderful ancient symbology tells stories. So symbolism itself is a storyteller, but it will only be told through the perception and mental mind of that individual, the medium. And so I think that what you have to do when you're thinking about symbols, you have to think it's gone on for lots of years, cultures, religions, there's all sorts of things that we have. And it's been subject to analysis for so many eons of years, but nobody can create an exact scientific book on it, because it's through the human psyche and the human persona that it's delivered, particularly from the other world. So I say, when you're developing, if your knowledge is open to expansion and you are flexible, you might well be surprised at what you received and what you can do. And not everything is as literal as you think.
I think the first thing is, if you're early on in your development, you need to be open-minded as much as possible, because that's all you're really trying to do at the end of the day. When you're trying to develop your mediumship, I think you're trying to sit, you're trying to quiet your mind, and you're trying to be open to it. Have no preconceptions about what you think you're going to get, what you want to get. You need to be as open-minded as possible. Or any beliefs that you've got or expectations, it just works as friction, doesn't it? And it's going to block the flow of the lovely symbols.
I think also to really recognize that natural creativity in the human psyche is really important. Our environment, we live in an amazing environment in our world. It's really important to get involved with the environment and nature. Look at the shading, the texture, the form, the colors, the smells, the sounds. That's just linked to the outside environment. And so you can create a story from that. You can literally create a story from anything if you want to, but you've just got to let the boundaries drop and stop limiting yourself and just take a plunge, take a dare and think, this is what I feel this is, I'm going to say it. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. Not to be frightened of being wrong, because that's how you learn. That's how you learn. But also remember that your symbology will evolve with you as your mind and your growth evolves in your natural spiritual understanding.
And there's so much detail in everything. Sometimes we can be, we might think we're getting a symbol like, I was saying about the bar stool. Oh, this is very simple. What is there in that? But you could take like tea leaves or leaves, and the amount of detail in one leaf you could do a whole reading on. So, there's so much detail in everything, but we don't stop enough at times in life to even acknowledge that or stop to even take a look at that detail.
And so what you need to do is you have to allow yourself to be inspired by the other world, allow the other world to move your mind to that bookshelf or that chair or that color of that curtain or the fabric of the carpet to see what they want to impart about that. They will use absolutely everything within you to portray that. And understanding, different religions, different cultures use different symbols. It's always good to read up on that. Have a look at what that means. You never know what faith you could be dealing with or what religious beliefs. That's very important as well. It might mean different things for different people. But I think that if you have an open awareness of the vastness of symbology, the whole world tells a story that the medium can pull from.
Do you know what? It's very interesting. I'm really leaning into this more myself now, and I'm starting to realise that so much of my mediumship is symbology. The amount in a reading of symbols I'm getting, I would say that accounts for the vast majority of what's going on at the moment. It's a feeling and it's symbols. My clairvoyance is the main thing that gets used. It's just symbol after symbol after symbol after symbol in a reading for me. And I am starting to, like you said at the beginning about the coffin, I'm starting to notice similarities. So, Christine, will you do me the honour of leaving us on a final thought of this part 2? And it's been a very interesting conversation about symbology today.
Well, what I would say to everybody is don't be afraid to be explorative. Don't be afraid to experiment and be explorative. Understand that, symbols are very alive in the psychic world. The spirit world can use your understanding of symbology to impart knowledge and information they want to convey. But don't be too tied into certain things. Be flexible with your symbology. Understand it and understand that you have a lot of symbols that represent you as well, that people can read from you psychically. Absolutely. The soul is made up of symbols. Absolutely. I mean, it's a massive field. We could talk for hours. There's also the archetypal field of symbols, etc. So I would say to everybody, be expressive, be explorative, do your practices with your groups, whatever you're doing, wherever you're learning, and make sure that you think about what you're imparting with the symbol. So you yourself have a good understanding of your own mental, emotional makeup and how something is making you feel. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. You only learn from what you're doing.
And is there a book that you would recommend for this? Without putting it on the spot?
Not necessarily, I'm afraid. I mean, I've read lots of books and I've got a lot of books on symbology, but I think it depends what attracts you. People could be attracted to sacred geometry. They could be attracted to gods and goddesses or the ancients, which is full of, their lives are full of symbology. They could be attracted to shapes and color and artwork with symbology. So there's not a particular book, but it would be worth exploring different things which give you really meaning to what you're doing, your symbols, as opposed to what a symbol means. Because what that symbol means in that book is what it is to that person who's wrote it.
Yeah, very true. Christine, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.